When representatives of the various public schools got together in 1863 to draw up the first laws of football, one of their problems was that each school had its own version of the game, suited to the environment in which it was played. Those who played on grass preferred a running game, in which the player in possession, often carrying the ball, could be bundled to the ground. Those who played on cloisters, where a great scrum of players would have led to broken bones, favoured a game with less handling and at least some passing. But generally speaking, football was about running with the ball, although dribbling is probably too grand a term for what was little more than head-down charging. Back then, opponents would try to get in the way and make tackles, while the player in possession's teammates would back up, that is, wait for a loose ball so they could run with it themselves. The offside law, as it was written in 1863, made the forward pass essentially impossible. The law was revised in 1866 following Eton's Convention and permitting a forward pass provided there were at least 3 members of the defensive team between the attacker and the opponent's goal when the ball was played. But the dribbling game continued to predominate until November 1872, when England travelled north to face Scotland in what is now recognised as the game's first international. That is also the first game for which we can say with any degree of certainty what the formations were, thanks to a journal written by the Secretary of the FA, Charles W. Alcock. He describes a lopsided 1-2-7 formation, with an extra man to the left of the attack than to the right, although it's not clear whether that was usual or just down to who was available. England's players were significantly heavier than the Scots, and it was recognised that in a running game that gave them a huge advantage. So, Scotland, all of whose players came from the Queen's Park Club, adopted a strategy of systematic passing, fielding a 2-2-6 and keeping the ball away from England. It worked. They drew 0-0, and the Scottish passing game was born. Now, that's not to say that there hadn't been any passing before. The first football club in the world, Sheffield FC, which was founded in 1857 and for a time operated as a power base separate from the FA in London, had no offside law, which might imply some sort of rudimentary passing, or at least a readiness to punt the ball clear. There is evidence of something similar at working-class Scottish clubs, but it was that first international that brought the notion of a coordinated passing game into the public consciousness. Scotland proceeded to dominate early international fixtures, while all the best English sides, after the coming of professionalism in the 1880s, had a bedrock of Scottish players. But no sooner had the 2-2-6 been widely adopted than it too began to evolve, with one forward dropping back into the midfield to create a 2-3-5. Now, who did it first is difficult to say. Cambridge University and Nottingham Forest both have a claim, but it can be said with some confidence that Wrexham adopted a 2-3-5 for their 1878 Welsh Cup final victory over Druids, after their captain and fullback, Charles Merlis, a local estate agent, decided that the pace of his centre-forward, John Price, could compensate for the loss of attacking edge caused by withdrawing E.A. Cross into midfield. And for almost half a century, the 2-3-5 remained the default. There were variations, of course. If a player was injured or a side was looking to defend a lead, it was relatively common for the centre-half to drop back between the fullbacks and become a third back. Teams began experimenting with counter-attacking or an offside trap. After losing a player to injury in an international against Scotland in April 1906, for instance, the England captain, S.S. Harris, advanced the left-back, Herbert Burgess, and operated a high offside line. Robert Compton, the right-back, sat deep to pick up long balls and breakaways, while the rest of the team pushed up to 20 yards from the Scotland goal line, effectively pinning them into their own goal area. The reaction was horror. This was not the done thing, and the law was then changed so that no player could be offside in their own half. But importantly, the First World War changed the profile of those running clubs. Independently wealthy amateurs who believed in playing the right way yielded to hard-nosed professionals who needed wind bonuses to put food on the table. As a result, football became more pragmatic. For example, after Herbert Chapman's Huddersfield had beaten Preston 1-0 in the 1922 FA Cup final, the Football Association conveyed its, quote, deep regret at the behaviour it had witnessed and expressed a hope that there will not be any similar conduct in any future final tie. Chapman's offence had been to play his centre-half deep, looking to hit Preston on the break. And as the offside trap became increasingly common, goals per game in 1924-25 dropped to an unthinkable low for the time of 2.58. Crowds declined, dropping 17% between 1921-22 and 1924-25. Now that was in part down to a declining economy, but also a sense that football was becoming less fun. So the FA took action, and in the summer of 1925, they changed the offside law again, so only 2 defensive players were required to play a forward onside. The result was a 40% increase in the number of goals scored. Now in that sense, the amendment was a success, but there were also a few unintended consequences. A number of teams responded by withdrawing the centre-half to mark the opposing centre-forward. That, though, left a shortfall in midfield. Chapman had moved to Arsenal in 1925, and it was under him that the inside forwards began to drop deeper, so that by the end of the decade, their 2-3-5 had developed into a 3-2-2-3, otherwise known as the WM. It brought an FA Cup and 4 league titles in 5 years, although Chapman died midway through the third of those. And for English football at least, the WM soon became the new default. The first steps towards the sort of formation that would be recognised today had already been taken.
If you like this video, please consider subscribing to the channel. The Athletic is home to some of the world's best sports journalists, including David Ornstein, Daniel Taylor, Ollie Kay, Amy Lawrence and James Horncastle. With the latest transfer news and insight on every Premier League football story that matters, theathletic.com puts you inside football.